Trump's delivered a stark warning to the Venezuelan government Monday. The US president stressed his country's commitment to regime change in the impoverished South American nation and called on its military now to rise up against President Nicolas Maduro.
And today I have a message for every official who is helping to keep Maduro in place. They are risking their future. They are risking their lives. You must not follow Maduro's orders to block humanitarian aid.
Who's the Commander-in-Chief of the National Bolivarian Armed Forces? Donald Trump from Miami. They believe that they own our country.
The days of socialism and communism are numbered not only in Venezuela, but in Nicaragua and in Cuba as well.
Donald Trump in Miami, with his tired rhetoric, questioned the right of our free country to adopt the ideas of Christian human socialism, our socialism, in almost Nazi-style speech.
It's been almost a month now since opposition leader Juan Guaido declared himself interim president of the impoverished country. He's continuing to turn up the pressure too on Nicolas Maduro, who's preventing tons of US aid from entering the country, fearing it will undermine his position. Dan Cohen's got the latest.
Trump called on Venezuelan military figures to accept amnesty from Juan Guaido, saying that if they don't, then they will lose everything. Now, up to this point, the Venezuelan military officers continue largely to support the elected president, Nicolas Maduro. Trump says that they are risking their future and their lives and calls on them to not make obstacles in delivering what he says is humanitarian aid. Now, many are questioning if this is humanitarian aid at all, including the International Committee of the Red Cross, whose spokesperson in Colombia said it is, quote, not humanitarian aid. Now, in the past days, the U.S. military has brought shipments to the Venezuelan border in Cucuta, Colombia, and actually the billionaire Richard Branson has announced he will be staging a concert to pressure Nicolas Maduro to open the border to this so-called aid. Earlier today, the Venezuelan government announced it will be holding its own concert on the border and said it wants to deliver aid packages.
The U.S. is causing tens of billions of dollars of loss to Venezuela's economy, and they're offering $20 million in crumbs. This aid is politicized that the U.S. is demanding Venezuela accept. The hypocrisy is that the U.S. is imposing a very heavy sanctions that is causing far more damage than any economic crisis in the country.
As President Trump continues his speech in South Florida regarding the crisis in Venezuela, we're actually going to return to the subject and bring in attorney and author Kevin Zeese. Thanks for joining us, Kevin.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so President Trump is speaking right now to a large crowd, and he has demanded that President Maduro step down and comply with the U.S. demands. What do you make of those demands?
I think Trump is living in Trump fantasy world. Venezuela is a sovereign country. It has a democratically elected, legitimate president and legitimate government, and they are going to stand against any demands to undermine their sovereignty. This is about taking Venezuela's oil, its gold, its gas, its minerals needed for electronics. This is U.S. Trying to seize the natural resources of Venezuela with a coup d'etat and military action if necessary.
Now, Kevin, we can see that on the outside. We can see those type of factors from the gas, from the gold. We can see that. But on the inside, and the people, the U.S. media is basically blaming President Maduro for the current economic crisis and the hurting in the streets and the humanitarian aid that is needed. You have written that the U.S. sanctions have deprived Venezuela of $7 billion and are primarily to blame, not necessarily the government of Maduro. Do you think that ending those sanctions would actually allow Venezuela to stabilize under this government?
Oh, absolutely, no question. This government has done as much as it can for the people of Venezuela. They've built 4 million houses for their poorest people. That's in a population of 30 million. 4 million houses could house 8 to 10 million people. Even with this economic war by the United States, they're still doing their best for their people, which is why Maduro has the support of the people. He won the election with 68% of the vote because he's doing what he can. They see what's going on, the people in Venezuela. Now, the drop in oil prices and the economic sanctions are the two major factors undermining Venezuela's economy. It's not socialism. It's abusive capitalism that's actually causing it, and the U.S. imperialism trying to seize. U.S. has told the London banks to keep over $1 billion worth of Venezuela's gold, not return it when Venezuela asks for it. They've shut down the money coming from Citgo in the United States, their oil company, billions of dollars a year. This is an economic war designed to change the government. It's going to fail because the people of Venezuela support the government. They oppose U.S. domination.
The U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has slammed Russia for sending long-range bombers to Venezuela for a joint military operation. Moscow retaliated, saying Pompeo's statement was absolutely inappropriate. In a tweet, the U.S. top diplomat accused Russia and Venezuela of squandering public funds. We can now cross live to our correspondent Maria Fanoshna, who's in the Venezuelan capital for us. Maria, what exactly has been said?
Yes, hi, Nikki. I have to say that the spokesperson of Russia's president seemed indeed a little bit surprised with not very diplomatic comments of America's top diplomat, saying the U.S. better mind its own business. This is what Dmitry Peskov had to say.
This is a very undiplomatic step from the U.S. Secretary of State. It's a serious accusation, pointed at the Russian government, and we believe it is not an appropriate statement. Talking about public spending, we do not agree with this. More on that, this is an inappropriate statement from a country which could feed the whole of Africa with half its military budget. We continue to seek dialogue with our colleagues and hope for Washington's readiness sooner rather than later.
This response came after the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo had claimed that sending 2 Russian military aircraft across Atlantic was a waste of money. These are his words.
Russia's government has sent bombers halfway around the world to Venezuela. The Russian and Venezuelan people should see this for what it is. 2 corrupt governments squandering public funds and squelching liberty and freedom while their people suffer.
This verbal exchange followed the deployment of 2 Russian strategic bombers here in Venezuela earlier on Monday as part of a broad military cooperation between Moscow and Caracas. We witnessed the arrival of 2 Russian white swans. Here's my report.
On March the 1st, President Putin announced a new generation of weapons vastly superior to anything developed around the world.
У России такое оружие есть.
A hypersonic system, an ICBM with unlimited range, weapons that can fly through dense layers of the atmosphere, a nuclear-powered cruise missile, underwater drones, a unique combat laser complex. That got everyone talking about an arms race and that deadly Russian missile. But from Russia's point of view, it's the one that feels threatened and wants to restore nuclear parity. So how does that work? And what did Putin mean when he said,
Нас никто не слушал. Послушайте сейчас.
To be clear, nuclear parity came as a result of an arms race. It was provoked by the first and, so far, only nuclear strike in history, when the US dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. Estimates put the total number of casualties at up to 450,000. By 1949, the USSR had its own nuclear weapon ready. By 1952, the US tested the first thermonuclear device. A year later, the Soviet Union followed suit. Both sides began to develop ballistic missiles in an attempt to get ahead of each other. The US installed nuclear weapons in Turkey, and the USSR put missiles in Cuba. It was followed by the Cuban crisis, which saw the world teeter on the brink of nuclear war. Until Moscow and Washington realized there could be no winners. That's when the period of détente came about. By the early 1990s, it seemed the tension between the two countries was over. It was a time of promises, although some would prove empty over time. NATO famously promised Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev that it would not move an inch to the east.
Даже такие были выражения, как это было у Бейкера, госсекретаря, что мы и на 10 сантиметров не двинемся в интересах НАТО или что-то.
Recently declassified documents on the 1990 negotiations proved Russia's account is accurate. If we
maintain a presence in Germany that is part of NATO, there would be no extension of NATO's jurisdiction for forces of NATO 1 inch to the east.
There would be no effort to exclude anyone, and there would be no step taken at this time to push anyone ahead of others.
In 1994, the US changed its mind about expanding east.
We're going to move forward on this, but I'd never spring this on you.
But over the past 18 years, NATO's been joined by Hungary, Poland, the Czech Republic, Bulgaria, Romania, Slovakia, Albania, Croatia, Montenegro, as well as the former Soviet republics of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. NATO is now at Russia's doorstep. Here is an online meme on how Russia moved its country too close to NATO's military bases. Furthermore, the US moved its missile defenses closer to Russia's borders, another promise broken by Washington. In 2002, the US pulled out of the ABM treaty signed decades before when the Soviet Union was still in place. What is missile defense? It enables one party to launch its own missiles and intercept any counterstrike. It could guarantee victory in a potential war. Of course, NATO and the US say their missile defenses are not against Russia, but against Iran and North Korea. But the locations tell another story. Missile defense installations were placed in Poland, Romania, California, and Alaska. They're also planned for Japan and South Korea. Missile defense ships patrol the seas close to Russian territory.
Создаются системы, элементы систем противоракетной обороны, что нас очень беспокоит, и мы постоянно об этом говорим в течение 10 лет. Это разрушает стратегический баланс в мире.
The balance is disrupted, and Russia, which hasn't ramped up its missile defenses like the US, is facing a deadly danger.
Вы же все понимаете, о чем идет речь. Чего молчите-то? Вы все молчите. Ситуация усугубляется. Ведь это подталкивает гонку вооружений. Новый виток создает. Это же очевидные вещи. Вот мы все время думаем, а как ответить? Мы думаем, совершенствовать систему, значит, преодоления систем противоракетной обороны. Вот это и есть виток гонки вооружений.
Russia says it was forced to come up with a weapon capable of bypassing missile defenses in order to restore nuclear parity. The Kinjal MiG-31 can launch hypersonic missiles that can travel at more than 10 times the speed of sound. Thanks to that and their unpredictable trajectory, they are unstoppable. It's an unrivaled weapon. The US doesn't plan to test its hypersonic weapon until 2019. The Avangard hypersonic vehicle can fly at up to 20 times the speed of sound. An ICBM will take it to an altitude of several dozen kilometers, from where it can dive headfirst back to Earth at top speed with aircraft-like maneuverability, dodging any missile defenses. In contrast, when other existing ballistic missiles re-enter the atmosphere, they fly at a preset trajectory, making them easy targets for ABM systems. Sarmat might seem like an ordinary ICBM, but its range is much longer. The legendary Topol-M missiles can only take the shortest route through the ABM systems. Sarmat can travel via the North or the South Pole, where there's no missile shield, and it will still hit its target. But most importantly, Sarmat is a heavy missile capable of carrying more than 20 warheads. That's 5 times more than previous generation missiles. The Burevestnik nuclear-powered cruise missile is a unique weapon. It's basically the same as an American Tomahawk. Whereas the Tomahawk's range is limited to 2,500 kilometers because of fuel constraints, Russia's new missile can fly indefinitely. It can take any path to avoid missile defenses. Just like Poseidon underwater drones. Similar to the regular drones we're used to, except these are submarine launched and travel at incredible speeds towards their targets under the sea. They run so deep that no equipment can track them. Even if detected, their high speed prevents them from being intercepted. The new weapons can work together to neutralize any existing missile defense systems. Kinjal can destroy ground-based ABM systems. Poseidon drones take care of those at sea. Then, the Sarmat, Avangard, and cruise missiles can be launched towards their target, bypassing any remaining barriers. On top of that, there's also a combat laser complex, Peresvet, which is unique because it almost instantly delivers an energy beam to a target and has an unlimited battle reserve. Developing new weapons is not a belligerent move, rather a move to restore parity. Perhaps this time the call for a balance of force and fair treatment all round will be heard.
Нас никто не слушал. Послушайте сейчас.
Trying to ignite a new Cold War. But Putin is touting
Putin is touting Russia's new invincible nuclear-powered missile that is capable of hitting anywhere in the world, according to him. Putin showed a video as proof, simulating Russian missiles apparently raining down on Florida near the president's Mar-a-Lago estate. Our next guest is skeptical of Putin's claim about his capability, but has real feelings about his intentions. Joining us now is General Michael Hayden, former director of the CIA and NSA under President George W. Bush. Sir, always a pleasure. Nothing subtle about that, General. Missiles, accurate or inaccurate about the capabilities, right down on Florida? I mean, is that...
Actually, that's one of the stunning aspects of the demonstration yesterday. They would actually use an absolutely recognizable part of the United States to show where the targeting was. I mean, look, we'll run out our videos to explain capabilities and new capacities, but they're usually generic. They're not going after a particular country for that very reason. You don't want to be seen doing that. Clearly, he wanted us to see that.
U.S. defense officials say this is the real deal. Russia test firing its new high-speed hypersonic missile, a missile that the U.S. military currently cannot defend against. Russian President Vladimir Putin pulling no punches on his intent.
The new avant-garde missile system is invincible against today's and future air and missile defense systems of the potential enemy. This is a big success and a great achievement.
If the weapons work as advertised, there is no current defense against them.
From here, I'm going to a meeting with 60 foreign ministers and envoys from countries around the world that are against Iran. What is important about this meeting, and this meeting is not secret, because there are many of those, is that this is an open meeting with representatives of leading Arab countries who are sitting down together with Israel in order to advance the common interest of war against Iran.
In its transcript of that interview, Netanyahu's official Twitter account deleted the phrase war with Iran and replaced it with combating Iran. But in the original video, you can hear the Prime Minister saying in Hebrew the word that translates as war. Iran's foreign minister said the original tweet exposes Netanyahu's true intentions, adding the whole world now knows them too. Javad Zarif dubbed the Middle East summit in Poland the Warsaw Circus. Meanwhile, the US Vice President Mike Pence has just lashed out at Iran.
The greatest threat to peace and security in the Middle East is the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Political analyst Syed Mustafa Qureshi thinks that Netanyahu's war comments about Iran are a way of saving his own reputation back home.
Well, let's discuss this now with Sadek Zepakalam. He's a professor of political science at the University of Tehran. What are the chances that Israel will defy Washington and London and attack Iran?
Well, I personally believe that it is very unlikely because Iran is not Iraq. And Iran is not Lebanon, Hezbollah, Iran is not Hamas. And I don't think that playing with fire would be something that Israeli will be very serious about it. Because let us conceive that there is a military strike by Tel Aviv against Iranian nuclear site. Well, do they expect that Iran will sit back and say that why did you do that? No, I think that the response from Iran would be very powerful and very severe.
Israel is being serious, though, with its rhetoric, isn't it? But there is actually no proof at the moment that Iran is developing nuclear weapons. So why is Israel stepping up its threats?
Well, I don't know. Perhaps partly Israel is trying to as it were, to prevent Iran from becoming a nuclear power. Perhaps the Israelis think that once Iran has managed to acquire the technology of uranium enrichment, Iran can develop an atomic weapon within 6 months to 12 months, whenever that Iran desires. So perhaps Israelis are thinking that a preemptive strike against Iranian nuclear facilities will prevent Iran from becoming a nuclear power. But the point is that Iran has already has become a nuclear power.
The Islamic Republic of Iran has unveiled a new missile capable of reaching targets up to 800 miles away. RT correspondent Dan Cohen has this story.
Iranian officials celebrated the development of their new missile on the 40th anniversary of the Iranian Revolution.
We live in a world in which some rulers do not pay attention to the nation's rights, the nation's sovereignty, their votes, and are not committed to any agreement and international laws. They violate all of them easily.
It's a surface-to-surface projectile capable of flying at low altitudes. It can be launched at a moment's notice and reaches distances up to 800 miles away. It's no surprise why Iran would want missiles that can reach such distances. Now, it has the capability to strike countries which have made clear their desire to see regime change in Iran, even by military force. It was just a few months back that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu threatened to annihilate Iran during an appearance at the facility where Israel has built dozens of nuclear weapons. Here's what he said about the new missile.
I have a clear message to the tyrants in Tehran. We know what you are doing, and we know where you are doing it. We will continue to act against Iran with all tools at our disposal in order to ensure Israel's security and future.
Or how about Saudi Arabia? Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman called Iran's Ayatollah worse than Hitler, and he successfully lobbied the Trump administration to increase pressure on Iran. For its part, the Trump administration has done just that. First, Trump pulled out of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, better known as the Iran deal, and now he's keeping troops across the border in Iraq to keep an eye on Iran.
You're keeping troops in Iraq because you want to be able to strike in Iran?
No, because I want to be able to watch Iran. All I want to do is be able to watch. We're going to keep watching, and we're going to keep seeing. And if there's trouble, if somebody's looking to do nuclear weapons or other things, we're going to know it before they do.
Now, some might point out that the
60 rockets were fired by Israeli jets at Iranian positions in Syria, with a further 10 missiles fired from the ground. It is the second such strike by Israel in as many days. Tel Aviv claims it was responding to 20 rockets launched by Iran from Syrian territory into the Golan Heights. First rocket attack by the Israelis was launched right after Donald Trump announced his decision to withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal, which was reached back in 2015. In his latest statement, the US president blamed Iran for, quote, bedlam and death.
We'll see how we do with Iran. Probably we won't do very well with them, but that's okay too. They've got to understand life, because I don't think they do understand life. If you look at what's happening in the Middle East with Syria, with Yemen, with all of the places they're involved, it's bedlam and death, and we can't allow that to happen.
Another statement from Trump, and we're in for another treat. It's so juicy you can't help but savor it. Let's take it from the top.
We'll see how we do with Iran. Probably we won't do very well with them, but that's okay too.
Of course, he probably won't do very well with Iran. He just reneged on a deal that let the country's economy breathe more freely for the first time in decades. And by chain reaction, Trump probably won't get along with a bunch of other countries either. Yes, all those nations who decided to stay in the deal, reiterating their support for it. Did Trump see this coming, the rift with his own allies? Probably the answer doesn't matter that much. After all, the America First mantra got Trump elected, and if you don't get it, you're in for a life lesson.
They've got to understand life, because I don't think they do understand life.
Wikipedia has a whole article on American exceptionalism, and this tirade could very well add a section to it. We get it, Mr. Trump. You say understand life. We here understand how America wants it. And roll over and play. And here's why, according to Trump, everyone should be on board with his Iran decision.
If you look at what's happening in the Middle East with Syria, with Yemen, with all of the places they're involved, it's bedlam and death. And we can't allow that to happen.
What a set of arguments. Apparently, it's okay to support Saudi Arabia in their bombings of Yemen, a deadly campaign that resulted in the world's worst man-made humanitarian crisis. All courtesy of American weapons, American logistical support, and American intelligence. And with Syria, I must have missed the moment when Iran joined the US in sending money and weapons to jihadist armed groups seeking regime change. Trump has laid out a list of demands to Iran. Most notably, he called on Tehran to drop the, quote, quest to destroy Israel, an explicit indicator of who Trump's trying to court here. And this is how Iran feels about Trump's move. And the American flag isn't the only thing in tatters now. So is the Iran nuclear deal, which has left Europe scrambling for a response. One thing is clear, though. They won't be taking a leaf out of Donald's out of the deal.
In a rare admission, Israel's military acknowledged its jets struck positions near Syria's capital of Damascus earlier today. The IDF claimed that it targeted Iran's special forces, but at least 4 Syrian soldiers were among the casualties, according to the Russian Ministry of Defense. The Israeli Air Force also inflicted damage on the capital's airport and targeted Syrian air defense systems. I'm joined now by former Pentagon official Michael Maloof and help us dive into this. Okay, so Michael, I have to ask you, what exactly is Israel's involvement in Syria right now?
Well, their stated notion is to stop Iran from coming into being a threat to Israel, that anything that has to do with Iran, as far as they're concerned, especially in Syria, and as well as what we've seen now in terms of their influence in Lebanon, is something that's non-negotiable as far as the Israelis are concerned. And they have actually announced that they're going to actually increase their bombardment of alleged Iranian sites in Syria, which is a real serious escalation, and it's coming at a very interesting time.
Well, it's the timing of this I have to look at, because right now you're talking about, obviously, the United States and Syria trying to pull back. You're also talking about Russia, other issues that are going on with Syria itself, and yet Israel goes and brings Syria into their equation as well. Can the Middle East handle all of these different turns at this stage?
I think it's reaching a breaking point, because it's just going to take one episode that's out of the norm, that's going to create that's going to light the fuse and blow up the keg. It's just
going to dynamite go across the board.
It's just escalating like crazy. I think that Israel will to answer your question, Israel has an agenda on its own. It's got elections coming up. It's got to in April. Netanyahu himself, the prime minister, has a lot of scandal domestically, and he just needs a tail to wag the dog. But it's also having the effect of possibly just dragging the United States into further conflict, which we don't need and want at this time.
Iran has established a military presence off Yemen's coast just hours after Washington carried out its first direct strikes against Houthi forces. The U.S. fired Tomahawk missiles from a warship in the Red Sea. We can just see over to the west over here, while the Saudi-led coalition is bombing Houthi positions from the air. And here are some of their American-made military jets. Now, Tehran has now entered the fray and sent its warships to this volatile area right down here on the southern coast, reportedly to protect vessels from piracy. Now, the White House insists its airstrike was a defensive measure against a reported attempt by the Houthis to target a U.S. Navy destroyer. But the move threatens to take the conflict to a whole new level, as RT's Paula Sleer now reports.
The last thing the United States needs right now is a new war on its hands. But as things heat up in Yemen, it's possible that the center of international conflict could be shifting from Damascus to Sana'a and expanding dangerously from a regional to global scale. In two separate incidents, missiles were fired at U.S. warships off the Yemeni coast. The Pentagon then authorized the hitting of 3 radar sites in rebel-controlled western Yemen in response, even though the Iran-supported Houthi rebels denied firing rockets. It's the first direct military strike by the U.S. in Yemen, which until now was limited to providing the Saudis with weapons and intelligence.
This was a response to direct threats to our people, to our ships, and we responded to that threat, and we will be prepared to respond again.
The next step after that was to see Iran deploy warships to the Gulf of Aden.
The Iranians are confident that the Americans are lying about missile attacks on American vessels. They say that this is a fabricated story so that the United States could enter the fray on behalf of Saudi Arabia to boost Saudi morale, because the Saudis are losing the war. They have lost the war.
And having America getting directly involved could come at a high price. Consequence number 1, the US may find itself dragged into further military engagement. Consequence number 2, or it could embolden Saudi Arabia to ramp up its airstrikes. And consequence 3, which few would dispute, Yemen seems on its way to becoming the new geopolitical hot zone.
And the likelihood of military strikes around Syria has certainly put its neighbors on high alert. As RT's Paula Sleer reports, some worry it could be the catalyst for a large-scale regional war.
Now, the big concern, of course, is how will Iran react? We have heard from Iran that if Damascus comes under fire, it will regard this as an attack on its 35th province. The thinking is that Iran could activate both Hezbollah and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. It could get them to use their fighters to attack those countries who are supportive of a US-led military strike inside Syria. At the same time, Iran could also close the Strait of Hormuz. Now, this would affect around 20% of the world's supply of petroleum. The head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard has also said that if Damascus was to be attacked, this would see, and this is a direct quote, the immediate attack and the immediate destruction of Israel. This is, of course, something that the Israelis are taking seriously. The official word from the Israeli leadership is that they are not involved in anything inside Syria, but that they, of course, will respond and respond harshly if they come under attack. The Israeli army is calling up reservists. At the same time, the Israeli army has deployed the Iron Dome anti-missile defense system and other interceptors over the north of the country. The public has been queuing up in the thousands at local post offices and other outlets to collect gas masks. At the same time, there have been emergency drills held at various schools, and also there are many who are actually clearing out their bomb shelters now for fear of any kind of strike on Israel. The Jerusalem Post is a daily newspaper inside Israel, and it is running with the headline, "Keep calm, but carry on." At the moment, the mood in the region is anything but keeping calm. There is a growing sense that this conflict could result in an all-out regional war.
Good evening, friends. We start this evening with a brand new policy on Iran out of the White House. This morning, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo outlined the Trump administration's new plan on Iran. Mike Pompeo said the administration is prepared to crush Iran if it does not change course. Manila Chan has been following the story today and joins us this evening. Manila, this is quite a laundry list of demands, isn't it?
That's right, and good evening. In a speech titled After the Deal, A New Iran Strategy, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo didn't so much give a plan as much as he did lay out a list of demands, as you said. Pompeo told Iran that if they don't give in to all of America's demands, they will be met with the strongest sanctions in history and face bigger problems than they ever have before.
Iranian officials are reacting with skepticism to President Trump's comments. He is willing to meet with Iranian officials. The offer comes after a war of words between the two countries. RT's Dan Cohen has the latest.
Throughout his presidency, Donald Trump has consistently shown aggression towards Iran. In May, Trump unilaterally and illegally withdrew the United States from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, commonly known as the Iran nuclear deal, and levied crippling sanctions on the Islamic Republic. His administration has openly supported the Mujahideen al-Khalq, or MEK, an Iranian opposition cult that was listed as a terrorist organization by the U.S. itself until 2012. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo addressed members of the MEK at a conference in California on July 22nd. So it's not surprising that Iranian officials are reacting with skepticism to President Trump's offer to meet with President Hassan Rouhani. On Monday, Trump told reporters that he would meet with Rouhani without preconditions.
So I believe in meeting. I would certainly meet with Iran if they wanted to meet. I don't know that they're ready yet. They're having a hard time right now. But I ended the Iran deal. It was a ridiculous deal. I do believe that they will probably end up wanting to meet. And I'm ready to meet anytime they want to. And I don't do that from strength or from weakness. I think it's an appropriate thing to do.
A top Iranian member of parliament dismissed the possibility of negotiating, saying, quote, "The Americans violated an international undertaking by withdrawal from the nuclear deal, and they are using this trick to pretend that they want talks, but Iran will not accept." Hamid Abu Talebi, an advisor to President Rouhani, wrote on Twitter, "Respecting the Iranian nation's rights, reducing hostilities, and returning to the nuclear deal are steps that can be taken to pave the bumpy road of talks between Iran and America." This comes after a war of words between Trump and Iranian officials. On July 22nd, Trump took to Twitter to threaten President Rouhani, writing, "Never ever threaten the United States again, or you will suffer consequences the likes of which few throughout history have ever suffered before. We are no longer a country that will stand for your demented words of violence and death. Be cautious." President Rouhani dismissed the threats as empty and baseless. However, head of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, Qasem Soleimani, responded in kind.
Hereby, I tell you of this gambling, Mr. Donald Trump. Be aware that we have connections to you, which you cannot even imagine. You shouldn't insult the Iranian nation. You shouldn't insult our president. You must exercise caution in these matters. Go ask your predecessors and learn from their experience.
اینجا مرکز پدافند هسته‌ای فوردو و نیروهای پدافند دائم در حال جابجایی و آرایش نظامی برای مقابله با هر تجاوزی. با ورود اس-300 به ایران اسلامی جهان فهمید اگر تهدید کند، تحریم کند، تطمیع کند، ایران حق خود را خواهد گرفت و اس-300 طبق قوانین بین المللی حق ایران بوده و هست، چرا که ابزاری دفاعی است نه تهاجمی. هرچند فرزندان این مرز و بوم از فناوری اس-300 هم یک پله بالاتر رفتند و بدون این سامانه ایران حالا امن‌ترین فضا در خاورمیانه شده است، اما حق را باید.
Korea has announced it successfully tested a nuclear-capable intercontinental ballistic missile. It's the Hermit Kingdom's first missile test since September. Earlier, South Korea, the US, and Japan all reported detecting this test missile. Now, the missile is reported to be North Korea's most powerful to date. It landed almost 1,000 kilometers off the west coast of Japan, and during its flight, it reached a height of more than 10 times that of the International Space Station. That's according to both a statement by North Korea and to initial estimates by the South Korean military. Now, if directed differently, Pyongyang claims the missile could reach any target in America. A few minutes after detecting the launch, South Korea staged its own missile exercise. Precision strike missile launched by South Korea took place near the northern limit line in the East Sea, which separates the two Korean republics. RT's Ilya Petrenko now reporting from Seoul on how the region is reacting to the latest missile launch.
Well, this pretty much came out of nowhere after the relative calm of October and November when it comes to Pyongyang's test activity well into the night while Koreans in both the north and the south were sleeping. We found out about this latest ballistic missile test, and the U.S. President Donald Trump was briefed on the updates from East Asia while the missile was still in the air.
A missile was launched a little while ago from North Korea. I will only tell you that we will take care of it. We have General Mattis in the room with us, and we've had a long discussion on it. It is a situation that we will handle.
The U.S. President Donald Trump and the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe have been on the phone. During this conversation, they reaffirmed their commitment to counter North Korea after the recent missile test that impacted within Japan's exclusive economic zone. There is an international consensus, and the UN Security Council has said it many times that the North Korean nuclear tests and ballistic missile tests are illegal. The U.S., along with allies in Japan and South Korea, are in favor of continued pressure, including military means, on Pyongyang, while Russia and China are advocating a more restrained approach with step-by-step dialogue.
Following the missile test, North Korea announced it had completed its nuclear program. Now, the boost in Pyongyang's nuclear capabilities came as the rhetoric on both sides of the Pacific has been intensifying.
Era of strategic patience with the North Korean regime has failed.
The United States is prepared to use the full range of our capabilities to defend ourselves and our allies.
Our respected leader, Kim Jong-un, said that the U.S. would be unhappy to witness North Korea's strategic power on its Independence Day and called for frequently sending big and small gift packages.
They will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen.
Any threat to the United States or its territories will be met with a massive military response.
The U.S. neglects the international community's will to establish peace on the Korean Peninsula.
But if it is forced to defend itself or its allies, we will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea.
The Donald Trump administration does not have a credible strategy to deal with the issue. Any military options on the part of the United States will be very risky and strongly opposed by China and Russia, and will not be supported by South Korea. And it is obvious that economic sanctions alone will not be able to persuade Pyongyang to give up its nuclear weapons program. The United States can continue with military exercises, a bit more economic sanctions and so on, but they will be equally ineffective. At this stage, the Donald Trump administration is certainly unwilling to engage in negotiations with Pyongyang, so this explains the low-key response on the part of the United States.
South Korea's weather agency has detected a 2.5 earthquake close to the site where Pyongyang recently conducted a nuclear test. The quake is reported to be of natural origin, but it's believed to have occurred in the aftermath of the test. Meanwhile, Japan and the United States have called a UN Security Council meeting after North Korea conducted a new missile test on Thursday. The show of force comes amid the intensified military drills conducted by South Korea and America in response to a series of tests by Pyongyang earlier this year. Amid all the nuclear rhetoric, the US state of Hawaii has begun testing its emergency sirens for the first time since the Cold War.
North Korea's vicious young dictator exploding with confidence tonight. His government's news anchor uses new, very aggressive language to project Kim Jong-un's threat.
Kim Jong-un said we now have the clear capacity to directly and realistically attack American bastards who continue to attempt to invade the Pacific.
Kim's just tested 2 medium-range ballistic missiles. One failed, but weapons monitors call the other one a partial success because the missile flew 250 miles and even briefly entered space.
Saying that he can realistically attack Americans and not just the U.S. in general, that's a new level of threatening language from Kim, right?
Yes. The potential for provocation and provocative language is enhanced by Kim by the fact that now he has the technology that goes to match the language.
When Kim perfects the so-called Musadon missiles he just tested, experts say he'll be able to strike the Aleutian Islands in Alaska or U.S. military units on Guam. A U.S. intelligence official tells CNN tonight Kim's aggressive language, his celebration of this missile launch, underscores his regime's aspiration to be recognized as a nuclear power. Analysts say Kim also wants to fend off the threat he perceives from his principal enemies, who've just wrapped up a massive military exercise on his doorstep.
He wants to deter America from even threatening to intervene. He wants to deter South Korea at the same time, obviously. And to do that, he wants to be able to say, I can attack American bases, kill Americans in their beds.
Kim's also believed to be toughening up against the U.S., possibly to extort concessions, an attempt to get sanctions loosened. Although he's solidified his hold on power, analysts say if his economy gets squeezed too tightly, he won't be able to buy off North Korea's elites, and he could be threatened from within. But would this bold, impetuous young leader really provoke the Americans by striking them with a missile?
Any real provocation where he fires one missile off that's with a real warhead does some damage, he will be decimated. Pyongyang will become essentially a bowl of glass, and I think he knows that.
Still, there are tens of thousands of Americans in Kim's line of fire. More than 28,000 American troops are deployed in South Korea. Analysts worry tonight that if Kim tries to provoke South Korea with artillery fire, maybe a commando raid, that a mishap, a miscalculation from Kim's forces could harm those Americans, then we could be in for a dangerous escalation.
Pentagon has acknowledged that it conducted an unsuccessful missile defense test on Wednesday. The missile was launched from land and failed to intercept an incoming target launched from an aircraft over Hawaii. A Pentagon spokesperson confirmed the incident yesterday during a press briefing.
It did not meet our objectives, but we'll learn something all the time with these tests, and we'll learn something from this one, and we'll continue to improve our capabilities.
All right, to shed light on the issue, Michael Maloof, a former Pentagon official, is joining us live. Now, Michael, when something like this happens, you're always the person who has the right information for us. So let's get to the Trump administration. They have reiterated support for development of this missile defense using the North Korean nuclear threat as justification. However, after this latest test failure, what is the future of a system like this?
Well, there's no other choice but to continue trying to perfect it. This is actually a modification of previous models of the SM-3, as it's called. It's part of the, it's off of the so-called Aegis platform, a type of missile that's about ready to be deployed in Romania, for example. They have a lot of bugs, and you got to consider too that when you're shooting a missile like this, it's like trying to knock a bullet hit a bullet with another bullet. It's very, very difficult. And what's a little disturbing is that this is the second failure since June, I believe, and they were both shot under controlled conditions. So if a missile is fired in anger from, let's say, North Korea, and it's coming in at a terrific speed, the likelihood of that missile hitting that incoming is going to be extremely difficult. Again, that would not be under controlled conditions. And if the North Koreans, for example, were to do a swarm approach with 4 or 5 missiles at a time, it would absolutely overload the system. So something's going to get through. So the system itself needs a lot of work, and you're talking about technology levels that are still in the infant stage, and it's very difficult. What they're talking about in some cases is maybe working on like a modified SDI or Strategic Defense Initiative program and actually having launchers in space, because that's going to be an important future actually in trying to down missiles or even satellites that could in effect be nuclear weapons. But I think that for now the best time really to hit a missile in this case would be once it's launched, just after it's launched. But it could be a test, and that's one of the dilemmas facing policymakers and defense experts as to, is that missile a test or is it the real thing? And and so there's a long way to go in this development program, frankly.
Michael, I want to go back to something you brought up just a bit ago, North Korea. Of course, missile tests don't happen in a vacuum. There's the political situation as well. If the Pentagon isn't sure its missile defense system is reliable, is it a good idea for the U.S. president to be provoking North Korea by engaging in a war of words with Kim Jong-un?
Well, I take your point, and the answer is absolutely not. In fact, that feeds his narrative of that the United States is really out to do away with his regime, and survival for Kim Jong-un is absolutely critical and essential. And so any kind of military exercises, any sending B-2s from Guam to do practice runs over just south of the North Korean border of the 38th parallel or the DMZ zone, it's tantamount to a provocation in the eyes of the North Koreans. And we should be doing, we already have 3 carrier task forces right off of North Korea right now, and those are all provocations to try to put maximum pressure on him. But if he feels cornered, he may do the very thing that we're trying to prevent, and that is unleash a war. Now, his nukes would probably not be used on South Korea. That's too close. But he certainly could open up with a barrage of artillery that he has. He has 10,000 artillery pieces along the DMZ, hidden deeply embedded in mountains. So to have that kind of a provocation doesn't serve any purpose, and also it doesn't get him to do away with his nuclear and missiles that this administration has pledged will be done on Donald Trump's watch. But I've seen this movie before, and it just hasn't happened yet.
There was widespread panic on the US Pacific Islands of Hawaii on Saturday over an official alert telling people to run for cover because of a ballistic missile threat, although it did turn out to be a false alarm. People were sent text messages and TV broadcasts were interrupted to raise the alarm. Within minutes, though, officials scrambled to reassure people that, in fact, there was no threat. A local congresswoman did tweet, "There is no incoming missile." The message was sent out inadvertently, but locals were already rushing for cover and safety, with some trying to take shelter in storm drains. The governor of Hawaii apologised for the incident and blamed it on an employee pushing a button by mistake.
Now fired from his job as a Hawaii state warning officer, the man responsible for sending the state into 38 minutes of chaos is speaking out. Facing death threats, he's requested anonymity.
I was 100% sure that it was the right decision, that it was real. I was convinced that it was real.
So, just to be extremely clear, you are the person who triggered the false alert?
Yes. Unfortunately, I heard this is not a drill, and I didn't hear exercise at all. I'm really not to blame in this. It was a system failure, and I did what I was trained to do.
You believed you were following protocol?
Yeah, but I did what I was trained to do as far as listen to the message and, as far as the time element that we were